Hello and welcome to today's tutorial, JavaScript tutorial. Today we will cover event listeners in JavaScript. We have used event listeners before, which you might remember, or else I will point it out in this tutorial. But today we learn a new way to use them that has some advantages. Then we talk about intervals and timeouts and some more, which will be the useful JavaScript helpers that I have included because they're great, but also because we need them to build today's website, which I will present to you now. It's right here. So what this website does is I click Start, and it counts down from 10. If we hover this box, the number is going to be a different color. Ta-da! Okay, let's dive into this. And along the way, we'll learn our new learnings. So let's have one more look. If I click this button, a lot of things happen. The background turns black. The box turns white, but I can tell you that it already is. So the background turns black. The box starts moving. The numbers start counting down. And after 10 seconds, or when the numbers are running out, everything seems to be disappearing except a new image comes in. We can quickly inspect just to find out how this image comes in. Oops, it comes in as a background image rather than an image element. So out of all of this, the easiest thing, the one that we already know how to sort out, would be the background color. So let's start with the background color and then we'll get into all the rest. All right. This tutorial comes with exercise files that are downloadable below the video in YouTube or on the Communications Lab syllabus webpage. And yes, let's start with the background. The exercise files look like that. I'm gonna open the server as well so we can see how it looks like on the page. It already looks like we're done, right? But nothing works on here yet. Let's have a closer look at the code. That is the HTML, which looks much like last in the array and loops tutorial, because we have actually the exact same nav bar, navigation bar up here. So this is a div, and in there we have another navigation item, and in there we have one button. There's already an on-click event, which we will use in a second. It has an ID, start button. And down here we have a simple div with a p tag called countdown box and countdown. And the reason this is in the middle and the reason this stays nicely up here is that I included some CSS here for the navigation bar, here for the body, and here for the countdown box and the countdown, which is the p tag respectively. We also see that there's a background color white and white. So that tells us there is already a white box around it. We can test this, quickly changing it. And actually now you also find out why I included it both for the p tag and the div. That is, I just found out that we need it for both. There's still white here, which seems to be the background color of the p tag rather than the box. So to make a difference, we have to change both of them. Let's stick to white. I just changed both of them to white again. Make sure you do the same. And let's start, let's have a look in the JavaScript. Oh, there's already a function and a console log to make sure the script is loaded. Let's have a look if this truly does something. Script is loaded, and if we click the button, it says calling start, but start doesn't do anything yet. So let's start by making start do something, that is turn the background of the body black. Let's have a first, this is a little repeat of what we already know. To access the body of the page, we can say document.body. To change any styling, we first have to say style, and then follow this with the property that we want to change. Background color equals black. So that is the first thing that should happen when we click start. Okay, by the way, let's do this way. Now, let's see if this would make sense if I keep this down here. Yes, I think for now this works. Now I want to get right into the first learning item, that is event listeners. What are event listeners? In JavaScript, we can attach event listeners to elements on the page. The reason I always, the way I always imagine event listeners are, we basically select an element and say, hey element, from now on, listen if anyone clicks on you. If that happens, here's the function that you should call. Okay. And the way we did this so far is to say in our HTML on click and the function name. So here we say, hey button, from now on I want you to listen, to really pay attention if anyone clicks you. And if that happens, that's the name of a function that I want you to call. That does not only work for click, it also works for all sorts of other events that I will show you in just a second. But before that, maybe let's start with a question. What could we do if, let's say, we are creating an element in JavaScript? So we use, I'm just pseudo-coding here. We use something like this, which we have used since our first JavaScript session, right? Let's say we make a new button in JavaScript. But how could we then attach to this button a similar event listener? Probably there would be a way, but we would need to look it up first, right? Equally, there's other elements that we don't have access to in our HTML, such as, you might remember, the window. That is the actual browser window. That has events too. For example, we can resize the window, and we could have this event trigger function calls. But we do not have access to the window in our HTML. And thirdly, generally, it's a bit of a, like it leaves a lot of room for mistakes if we have to do something in JavaScript that is making a function and add something in our HTML, because our HTML might grow really large, and finding our elements then and have different buttons that are all using different functions that we then need to double check if the name is the same, etc. That's possible, but there is smarter ways. So what I want to show you today is how to add event listeners to elements on the page in JavaScript, so we don't need to touch anything in the HTML. The way to do this starts like pretty much everything else in JavaScript starts with finding the element on the page. So selecting it. The way we do this is by saying document. So what I want to do now is, instead of adding the event listener here to the button, we do it in JavaScript. So here we say, as always, document get element by ID. The ID is start button. Now this selects the element. What I want to do, because we're getting more and more professional here, is I want to store the selection in a variable. So then I can just use this variable to do things. Also, the place I like to do selections like this is at the very top. Now, we can say this element add event listener. And how many arguments do you think add event listener should take? What do we need to know? What do we need to tell the element when we attach an event listener? If I say, hey button, wait until anyone clicks you, and then call this function. How many pieces of necessary information did I just give the button saying that? The answer is not 3, not 4, but 2. 2 arguments are needed inside here. The first one is, what is the type of event I want this element to listen to? the type of this event, in this case, is called click. And note the type of the event always needs to be in quotes. And the second piece of information that I just gave when I was talking to the button is which function to call when the event takes place. That was the function name. So this does the same as that. And it looks like more, but it does have I'd highly recommend using these ways to attach event listeners over these. You can sometimes, when you try out stuff, use that, but generally it's good to keep code separated. And this also gives you other options. For example, adding event listeners to elements that are not yet on the page when we load the page, such as elements we create or the window. Before I delete this, I want you to see the main difference is that there is no parentheses. And the truth is, as you code JavaScript for many years, in the years to come, you will see something like this very often, where you pass a variable without, a function without the parentheses as an argument into a function. So I really want you to note this, and I want to point out to you that the way it's done here, that's rather the strange side for a JavaScript coder, what's happening down here. This is a little bit unusual. So it's better to get used to this over that. The reason why there is no parentheses is that every time we write parentheses means we are calling this function, meaning whenever the browser reads over these very letters, it will call the function. On the other hand, if we consider what we are doing here, it's not really us calling this function. It is us telling the element to wait for a click event, and only if that click event happens, then the element, should call this function. Right? There's a difference of us saying console log, which is a function that we call, and we want it to be called whenever the browser reads over line 10. On the other hand, when the browser reads over line 12, we don't want it to call start. We only want for it to remember that it should call start in the event of someone clicking on the start button. We call this a function reference. Okay. Now I want to show you quickly a few slides. The first one here, oops. Oh, I'm sorry for that. We see here, again, what I just said. There's no parentheses. We do not call this function. We simply pass a reference to the function, its name, to the event listener, so that when the event takes place, can call it. So this is very important. The other thing is that I wanted to show you is here we see a lot of different types of event listeners that you can all experiment with and use in this new way that you've just learned. For example, this is how you could use an event listener to trigger an event every time the window is resized, which can be really useful and used creatively. Okay, moving on. Now comes the moment where we delete our old ways. We save it and hope that it still works, and it does. Great. The next thing that happened, we can go back to the result page, is that I think the next thing I would like to tackle is this, that when I hover the box, the text turns red. And I want to tackle this because I'm going to now close the index.html, by the way. I want to tackle the color change because that will show us different event names that we can also use. So first of all, we are doing something with, we want to do something, we want to manipulate the styling of the countdown. So let's do the same thing that we did before, where we do the selection right up here to keep things organized in our code. Let's have a Let's have a look at the index.html, what the ID was. The ID of the box is countdown box. The ID of the p tag, the color of which we want to change, is countdown. So we are selecting countdown, which means now we can use this variable to do things with the countdown. We want to do two different things. We want to turn the countdown red, and we want to do something. Really, we want to turn it red when we go on it, and we want to turn it black when we go off it. Oh, I want to show you one more thing. Actually, what's happening here is it doesn't turn red when I'm on it, but when I'm on the box. So let's do the same. So it's not just when I'm on the number, it's actually when I'm on the box around it. So let's also select the countdown box. And maybe while we debug this, so I just changed the variable name here and changed the selector here. While we work on this, and things are not moving around yet. Actually we don't need this. My bad. Sorry. I was going to say we can change the color of the box while we do this, but for now we can just click the start button to see the box. Now, again, we want to do something when we get into the box and when we get out of the box. So let's start with that. That is adding event listeners. Add event listeners, and the one that is triggered when we get into the box is called mouse over. And let's just call the function mouse in box. And now we make a function in which we console log just to see if it works. Mouse in box. I'm going to click start to make everything black. And here we see every time we get on the box, this function is now called. Next, I'm going to copy this event listener attachment and listen to another event, mouse out, which is also, I think, an advantage in doing this in JavaScript. We can very quickly add a lot of different event listeners to the same element. Mouse in box, mouse out of box. Let's do this, and we change this out of box. So I just changed the console log, I changed the function name, and I changed the function reference, and I changed the event type that we're listening to. So now we have two different event listeners. That is when we get in, when we get out, when we get in, when we get out. Great. And now what do we actually want to do in here? We want to change the countdown to being red. Let's try this by saying countdown dot style color equals red. When we get into the box, see if it works. Getting in the box turns red. When I get out the box, it now stays red, because no one told it to be not red anymore, right? We can do this though in out of the box. Black. Now in the box, out the box, in the box. Perfect. All right. Now let's have a look what we do next. We have now learned event listeners, and I listed some reasons why it's good to use them. What I want to show you next is first a interval in JavaScript along with these JavaScript helping functions, and in the end I show you a timeout and what the mysterious anonymous functions that no one seems to know since they're anonymous, but I will tell you what they are anyway. So the first thing, let's see, the first thing we should do is when I click start, let's don't care about the moving around for now, but the number goes down. We've already learned in the last lessons about counter variables, right? To use variables to count all sorts of things. So we had variables that would increase or decrease while we, as we call a function. So let's make a variable. We call it counter. This variable is 10 because it's 10 here. Now what I want to do is I want to trigger the countdown when we click start. So really what I want to do is make a function called count number down. And all this function does for now should be counter equals counter minus 1. And let's also console log counter. Now, when do we want to call this function? We want to call it after we click start, but really then it should be called 10 times, right? So we want to tell JavaScript, hey, could you just call this function every 1 second? That would be nice. And the way to do this is by using an interval, so-called interval. The way this is called is set interval. And here again is the quiz question. I just said, hey JavaScript, could you call this function every second, please? How many arguments does set interval need? How many useful or necessary pieces of information did I just supply to JavaScript? The answer is not 10, not 5, not 1, not 0, but 2. 2 bits of information. That is, which function do we want to call in an interval? And how long is the interval? How long should JavaScript wait in between the function calls? With set interval, the order in which we supply the 2 is the function first. Again, no parentheses. And then the time of the interval in milliseconds. So our function should be called every 1 second. 1 second has 1,000 milliseconds. So let's see if this works. It should only console log something for now. If I click start, 9, 8, 7, 6, 4, 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, and so on. Now, next step, we need to update the number on the page, which is old news for us. We already know how to do this from previous classes. Saying countdown, which is the actual p tag element that we selected up here, inner HTML equals counter. Great. And I can still hover, mouse in and mouse out, mouse over and mouse out. All right, we'll take care of this in a second. Now, we're very far. Now comes the next bit. The box should move around. And the way it moves around in the example is it moves to random spots on the page. So for that, I want to introduce to you math.random. Let's have a quick look what math.random does. This is a JavaScript function, just like console log, that produces a random number. Let's have a look. So this random number is always surprisingly small, isn't it? That is because math.random always produces random numbers every time it's called between 0 and 1. Most of the times you want random numbers between a certain range. The way this is commonly done is by just saying math.random times 10, for example. Because now the random number will be between 0 and 10. Because we multiply the 0 to 1 range by whatever we want to be the range. Great. What do we want to be the range? The box should fly around between this width and this height. But what is the width and the height of our page? So for that too, we can ask JavaScript window.inner width. Let's have a look what this does. Nothing, it seems. I must have some error. Oh yes, this is not a function. This is a property of the window. So now this prints out, click start, 5.9. Let's see if I resize the window. So this automatically updates and always tells us the width of the window. Equally, window.innerHeight tells us the height. The reason why I want this is because now we can generate random numbers that are between the window 0 and the window width and 0 and the window height, and we can place our box there. So the most elegant and least prone to error way to do this is to say every time the number counts down, we generate a random x by saying math.random times window.innerWidth and a random y saying math.random times window.innerHeight. And finally, we move the box around. We say style left equals random x and style top equals random y. Now this is almost perfect. Let's see. Still nothing happens. Do you know why? Let's have a look. Take reference in the CSS. Here our countdown box is already position absolute, which is good. And this doesn't really show it so well, but this is very important. CSS needs to know which unit we are talking about. So we need to say our random number plus a string of px. Do the same down here. And now the box is moving around. Oh, one important thing. I actually forgot to comment this out in the exercise files, which is my bad. But I want to make very clear that naturally the box doesn't move around smoothly. And this is only because of that line that this happens right now. Normally, and this is just as good, the box would move around jumping. What this line says is transition any changes to the styling of this box, all changes, transition them smoothly as you can, and let the transition take 5 seconds. Just out of interest, what would it do if it's 5 seconds? Interesting. Because now it takes longer than the actual second. Now the box is always on the move. Well, I prefer 0.5. We also see here the box is 150 pixels wide. So to make sure that the box never reaches out, we could improve our code by saying minus 150. This would cause the box never to leave to the outside. Or maybe, let's see. I think this way. This should work better. Huh, what is happening here? Yes, now it never leaves the box, leaves the window to the right side. And we can do the same with the height too, to make it work even better. Okay, great, we're very far. The next stop is really just the grand finale, where we use a function called Timeout, which works just like interval, except it doesn't call a function on an interval every x milliseconds, but it calls a function once after a pause that we can define. The pause we want to define is we want something to happen when 10 seconds are over. So let's do this. We can say here, set timeout. Boom. After 10 seconds. Or while we work on it, I'm going to set it to 1 second. Or let's say 2 seconds. The function, oops, my bad. Function boo, we have to yet create. And what we want to happen there, by the way, never mind. What we want to happen here is we're gonna delete everything on the page. One trick to do this is to say the inner HTML of the body should be an empty string. And note this is now gonna happen after 2 seconds. There we go. Empty string. The other thing we want to happen is to say document body style background image should be the image I supplied or any other image you want that is in the assets folder. Shrek.jpg. See if this works. This did not work. Let's find out why. Background. Who finds the error first? Help me if you know it. Assets. Shrek.jpg. Oh, should have looked for the highlighting here. Document. Countdown 2 seconds. Great. Okay. Now the one more thing that I would like to do is to show you one thing, that is in the countdown function. Look at this. If we or maybe let's go back to printing the counter down here. And also now we can set the timeout to 10 seconds. Actually, sorry, let's keep it at 3 seconds. Nope. If we now open the console again, I want to point something out to you. That is, if we start the countdown, after 3 seconds, the countdown is over, but we see the count number down function keeps on being called. Okay. To do this, this is not very elegant because this means our website is still working in the background, and we would like to stop that countdown when it's stopped. Before we do this, or the way to do this, is by using another function called Clearinterval. The way this is used is that we need to give a variable name to our interval. So the setInterval function returns a JavaScript object that represents the interval. So we could say setInterval, let interval be setInterval counter. And the way to clear an interval, to make it stop, is then this way. We say clear interval. Which interval? The interval. But you already see the problem. As this is right now, this would never start. Now really where we want to clear the interval is after our timeout. So let's see if this works. And here we see script line 25, interval is not defined. That is because the interval is defined in here, and outside here, the word interval has no meaning. Now we could initialize this variable outside. So just for those of you interested, we could say that. But instead, I want to show you a different way. Because the truth is, so far in JavaScript, we have written many functions, often that almost include no code. So here, we have a function that does only 2 things, and we only call it once, but we need this 4 lines in our code and a new name for our function. And there is a shorter and more economic way to do this, which is called anonymous function. So again, the idea here is that we don't want to waste these 4 lines And we don't want to stress our creativity by needing to come up with a function name. Instead, what we can do is we can define the function right in the place where it's being used. So this calls that, right? So how about we put the whole function definition here. Next, if this function definition is right in the place where it's used, why would it need a name, right? It's being used where we define it. So names are only good if we ever refer to them, but we don't ever refer to this function because the only place we need it is right here. And because we don't need the name, a function that is used like this is called an anonymous function. So let's see if this still works. After 3 seconds, done. But the first countdown is still counting down. But now, since we have defined our function inside the same scope of the start function, now this will work. Let's see if it works. Great. So watch out for this pattern, that is inside a function, you define a new function. I think you can get used to this quite quickly. I know it looks very confusing right now, but I recommend to stick to the indentation like this, so to stick to always indent these the same, so your eyes gets used to, oh, that's an anonymous function. Let's see if there was anything else on the list. Timeouts, intervals, anonymous functions, window inner height. Oh, I knew I had these parentheses not here for a reason. Great. Let's put it all together, which means actually make this 10 seconds and make this really large and see the work we have created before we say goodbyes. Start. Turns red. Ta-da! Great. Good job. And I hope this was fun and you can use some of the learning in your projects. Have a good day and see you soon.